If you wanted to invest your money with absolute certainty in the late 1990s or early 2000s, you didn't look for a high-risk gambler. You looked for Bernie Madoff. He wasn't just another flashy broker on Wall Street. He was the bedrock of Wall Street. He was a visionary pioneer who helped build the electronic trading systems that modern finance relies on, even serving as the chairman of the Nasdaq. To the financial elite, to massive multi-million-dollar charities, and to ordinary families looking to secure their retirement, Bernie was a financial deity. He was the guy who could make your wealth grow steadily, year after year, rain or shine. In a world where the stock market swung wildly like a pendulum, Madoff's returns were a flat, comforting line. If the market crashed, Bernie still made money. If the market boomed, Bernie made just the right amount. He was the ultimate safe bet, a man whose reputation was so spotless it acted as an armor against suspicion. But there was a devastating catch. The investment strategy that supposedly generated this legendary, bulletproof wealth did not exist. For decades, the most powerful financial regulators in the world looked at his operation and saw a masterclass in financial engineering. They saw a man so deeply respected that questioning him felt like questioning the integrity of the American economy itself. But behind the tinted glass of his Midtown Manhattan office, there were no complex mathematical algorithms. There were no genius stock picks. There wasn't even a real trading floor for his investment business. Instead, there was a machine printing out fake account statements. The money wasn't being invested at all. It was sitting in a standard bank account, being used to pay off older investors who wanted to cash out. It was a giant game of financial musical chairs, where everyone assumed the music would never stop. Think about the sheer scale of this illusion. We aren't talking about a few $1 million stolen from a few gullible marks. We are talking about $64 billion. A sum so massive it is hard for the human brain to fully comprehend, yet it was made entirely of air. Every single month, thousands of wealthy clients opened their mail, looked at their growing balances, and felt a profound sense of security. They believed they were part of an exclusive club, protected by a financial wizard. They had no idea they were standing on a trapdoor, waiting for someone to pull the lever. And yet, for nearly 40 years, nobody did. The government looked the other way. The Securities and Exchange Commission investigated him multiple times and found absolutely nothing. It should have been completely impossible to hide a lie this massive for this long. It was. But the true mystery isn't just how he built this house of cards. It's who knew about it and why they stayed silent. How do you convince some of the wealthiest, smartest people on earth to hand over their fortunes without asking a single question? You don't ask them for it. In fact, you tell them they might not be good enough to invest with you. Bernie Madoff didn't run late-night television ads or cold-call investors. He operated behind a psychological velvet rope. He stalked the country clubs of Palm Beach and the charity galas of New York, letting it slip that his fund was closed to new money. If you wanted in, you had to know somebody. You had to be vetted. By the time a potential client finally sat across from Bernie, they weren't grilling him on his strategy. They were begging him to take their life savings. And once they were in, they felt like royalty. It was an affinity fraud built on social proof. If your country club president, your rabbi, and your favorite charity's board of directors all trusted Bernie, who were you to doubt him? The physical layout of Madoff's operation perfectly mirrored this grand illusion. Up on the 19th floor of the Lipstick Building in Manhattan, he ran a completely legitimate, high-tech market-making business. It was loud, chaotic, and state-of-the-art. But 2 floors down, on the 17th floor, was the secretive investment advisory arm where the real money supposedly lived. Only a handful of trusted employees were allowed down there. There were no Wall Street prodigies crunching numbers. Instead, high school graduates were typing fabricated trades into an ancient IBM computer, printing out millions of pages of fake statements on dot matrix printers. It was like walking into a Michelin star restaurant, only to discover the kitchen is just one guy microwaving frozen dinners. Yet to the outside world the facade was impenetrable, almost. In Boston, a brilliant, obsessive quantitative analyst named Harry Markopolos was handed a copy of Madoff's returns. His boss wanted him to reverse engineer Madoff's strategy so their firm could replicate the profits. Madoff claimed to use a strategy called a split-strike conversion, essentially buying a basket of stocks and simultaneously buying insurance against those stocks dropping. It sounded highly sophisticated. But Markopolos took one look at the numbers and realized a chilling truth. It took him exactly 5 minutes to suspect it was a fraud, and 4 hours to prove it mathematically. There simply weren't enough options contracts in the entire global market to support the volume Madoff claimed to be trading. His returns went up in a straight, impossible 45-degree line. In the real world, the stock market breathes. It goes up, it goes down. Madoff's chart didn't breathe. It was the financial equivalent of a patient with no heartbeat walking out of a hospital. Markopolos didn't just whisper his concerns. He compiled a 21-page document titled "The World's Largest Hedge Fund is a Fraud" and handed it directly to the Securities and Exchange Commission. He laid out the math, the missing money, and the exact steps regulators needed to take to catch him. He handed them a loaded gun and pointed it directly at the target. The SEC sent junior investigators. They sat in Madoff's office, intimidated by his legacy and charmed by his name-dropping. When they asked for records, Bernie just handed them more fake dot matrix printouts. They never made the one phone call to the clearinghouses that would have instantly proven Bernie wasn't making any trades. The SEC closed the case, giving Madoff a clean bill of health. Markopolos was so terrified of what he had uncovered that he started carrying a gun and checking under his car for explosives. Bernie Madoff, meanwhile, went right back to collecting billions. It seemed nothing on earth could bring the scheme down. Regulators had failed. The math had been ignored. But Bernie was about to meet the one enemy he couldn't outsmart, and it was going to tear the global economy apart. The enemy wasn't an auditor, a rival banker, or a federal prosecutor. It was reality itself. In the fall of 2008, the global economy caught fire. Lehman Brothers collapsed. The housing market evaporated. Panic swept through Wall Street like a virus. Suddenly, wealthy investors, hedge funds, and charities didn't want to invest new money. They were bleeding cash elsewhere, and they desperately needed their safety net. They started calling Bernie Madoff to cash out. A Ponzi scheme is like a shark. It has to keep swimming forward, swallowing new money to survive. The moment the influx stops, the creature dies. When the 2008 financial crisis hit, Madoff's food supply vanished instantly. By November, terrified clients had submitted requests for $7 billion in redemptions. To the outside world, this shouldn't have been a problem. Madoff supposedly managed over $60 billion in assets. Selling off a fraction of that portfolio to pay back investors should have been a routine day at the office. But there were no assets to sell. There was no portfolio. There was only a single J.P. Morgan Chase bank account, and it was rapidly draining to zero. Behind the calm, grandfatherly smile he wore in public, Madoff was drowning. He frantically flew across the globe, attending galas and private dinners, begging European billionaires and royal families for emergency cash infusions. He told them he was doing them a favor, offering a rare window to invest in his exclusive fund. It was the equivalent of trying to patch the hull of a sinking cruise liner with a roll of duct tape. By the first week of December, the math was terminal. The bank account that held the entire foundation of Madoff Securities had dwindled to just a few $100 million. The music was finally stopping, and tens of thousands of people were about to realize there were no chairs left. Bernie knew the FBI would be walking through his doors any day. The lie was too big to run from and too heavy to carry anymore. He had to make a choice about how the illusion would end and who would be standing in the blast radius when it detonated. On December 10, 2008, he called his two sons, Mark and Andrew, up to his sprawling Manhattan penthouse. Both men worked for the legitimate market-making arm of their father's firm on the 19th floor. They revered him. To them, he was not just a father but a titan of industry. Standing in his living room, the most trusted man in finance finally broke. He looked at the boys he had raised and told them his entire life's work was a mirage. "It's all just one big lie," he confessed. "A giant Ponzi scheme." Mark and Andrew were instantly paralyzed. They were staring at a stranger who had just handed them a live grenade. They were forced to make an impossible choice: help the father they loved hide his remaining assets, or hand him over to the federal government and destroy their own family name forever. They didn't even wait 24 hours. But a confession wouldn't save the victims. The FBI was on its way, and a catastrophic shockwave was about to hit thousands of innocent people who had absolutely no idea what was waiting for them in the morning. The next morning, December 11, 2008, two federal agents knocked on the door of the Madoff penthouse. Bernie answered in his pajamas. When they asked if there was a legitimate explanation for the missing billions, the former titan of Wall Street simply shook his head. "There is no innocent explanation," he said, and with those 6 words the illusion shattered. When the news broke, it didn't just rattle the stock market. It devastated living rooms across the globe. Imagine walking into your local bank to withdraw your life savings, only to discover that the steel vault was just a hyper-realistic painting on a brick wall. The money was never there. That is exactly what tens of thousands of people experienced in a single afternoon. The victims were not just greedy billionaires looking for an extra percent. They were pension funds for school teachers and firefighters. They were charities set up by Holocaust survivors. They were elderly couples who suddenly had to go back to bagging groceries at 80 years old just to afford their medication. The human cost was catastrophic. The shame and financial ruin drove several prominent investors to take their own lives, including a French aristocrat who couldn't bear the guilt of losing his client's money. But the tragedy didn't stop at the victims. Bernie Madoff stole from the world, but the blast radius of his lies ultimately consumed his own blood. His sons, who had turned him in, were entirely ruined by the toxic legacy of his name. Mark Madoff, unable to withstand the relentless public hatred and the crushing weight of suspicion, tragically took his own life on the exact 2-year anniversary of his father's arrest. 4 years later, Andrew Madoff died of cancer. Bernie's wife, Ruth, who was stripped of her sprawling estates and staggering wealth, retreated into complete obscurity. As for Bernie himself, the judge handed down a maximum sentence of 150 years. The man who once commanded the absolute trust of the global elite died behind bars in 2021, entirely alone in a prison hospital. The aftermath forced a brutal reckoning. The Securities and Exchange Commission, humiliated on a global stage, was forced to fundamentally rewrite its rulebook. Regulators realized they could no longer just take a respected financier's word for it. They actually had to verify the math. Meanwhile, a relentless bankruptcy trustee named Irving Picard spent over a decade hunting down the stolen funds. Like a detective piecing together a shattered mirror, he achieved a financial miracle, recovering more than $14 billion of the original principal for the victims. But no amount of recovered cash could refund the lost decades, the shattered families, or the lives that ended in despair. The legend of Bernie Madoff isn't really a story about complex economics at all. It is a story about human nature. We desperately want to believe in certainty. We want to believe that the chaotic, terrifying world of finance can be tamed by the right person. Madoff weaponized that deeply human hope. He proved that the most dangerous weapon on Wall Street isn't a complex derivative or a high-frequency trading algorithm. It is a comforting smile, an exclusive invitation, and a promise that everything is going to be perfectly fine. The money was eventually tracked down, but the blind, unquestioning trust that defined an entire era of American finance, that is gone forever.